I'm Karen Denby, and I'm here to welcome you to our April Intereach webinar. Stay tuned following today's presentation to hear about our other upcoming webinars. Amanda McMillan, my fellow webinar co-chair, and I are delighted to have as today's presenter, Dr. Gabriele Bammer. Dr. Bammer is a professor in the Research School of Population Health at the Australian National University, or ANU. She is an ANU Public Policy Fellow and an inaugural Fulbright New Century Scholar alumna. She has held visiting appointments at Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government, Boston, Massachusetts, at ETH Zurich, a science, technology, engineering, and mathematics university in Zurich, Switzerland, and at the University of Natural Resources and Life Science in Vienna, Austria. She's an author and editor, and those books include Disciplining Interdisciplinarity, Integration and Implementation Sciences for Researching Complex Real-World Problems, which she authored. She edited Change, Combining Analytic Approaches with Street Wisdom, was co-author of Research Integration Using Dialogue Methods, and co-edited Uncertainty and Risk, Multidisciplinary Perspectives. Today we'll hear about Dr. Bammer's work in developing the new discipline of integration and implementation sciences in her presentation, Valuing Our Knowledge and Skills, Why We Should Consider a New Discipline of Integration and Implementation Scientists. I give you Dr. Bammer.
Great, thanks very much, Karen, and hello everyone. It's lovely to see a bunch of names that I recognise from presentations that you've given, which has been fantastic, and also a few names that I don't recognise. So I hope we'll have time for a bit of a discussion after I make a few opening remarks. So one of the things that we've been discussing, and by we I mean particularly Christine Hendren and Holly Falk-Krasinski and I, is where does this set of skills that we have lie? So Holly's been involved in setting up something called Research Development Professionals, and particularly the National Organisation of Research Development Professionals, or NORDP, which is very much aimed at people who fill an administrative role. Christine really has a foot in both the administrative and the academic camps. And I've been thinking about this very much in terms of an academic role, and what's the knowledge and skills that we bring to the table that would make this an academic role. So that's the focus that I've been putting on this. And so what I want to do today is to, I guess, pitch you the case for why this could be thought of as an academic discipline. And then I'm kind of interested in how you see these knowledge and skills pertaining to your own work, and where you see yourself, whether you see yourself primarily in an administrative role or primarily in an academic role, or if you can't be in an academic role, is that where you think you should be, or do you think that where the work that you do is pitched appropriately now? So I guess that's the conversation that I'm hoping we'll have. So, that's not very good, so I can't get, there we go. So let me start by setting the scene about the kind of research that I'm interested in. So I'm particularly interested in research that deals with complex problems. And by this, I mean problems that are systems problems, so everything's connected to everything else. Problems where context matters, so this is different from physics or other natural sciences where you're trying to look for universal laws. The kind of problems that I'm interested in, ones where it depends on where you are and who's involved and all those sorts of things, where you're likely to have values conflict, where you can't know everything, and where we don't have perfect answers. And so the sort of problems that I'm interested in are things like global climate change, addressing poverty, addressing the blowout in healthcare costs, addressing organised crime, problems like that. So not only is context important, but the kind of research that we do to address those problems is team-based, so you can't do it on your own. It involves bringing together multiple disciplines. It involves working with stakeholders, and by stakeholders I mean both people who are affected by the problem and also those who are in a position to act, which sometimes, and those are sometimes referred to as end users. And the kind of research that I'm interested in is not only improving understanding, but it's also getting us into a position where we can act based on that understanding, or more accurately, where we can support the people who are charged with acting. So they might be policymakers or practitioners or civil society organisations. So I'm really interested in research that understands complex problems more comprehensively and that can assist those who are called on to act on them. So let me give you an example from work that I've done. The problem that I led a team addressing was whether or not we should prescribe pharmaceutical heroin or diamorphine to dependent heroin users. And this fits all the criteria of being a complex problem. So it's a systems problem. It's not only affecting health, it also has ramifications for crime. It also has ramifications for popular culture, for poverty, for international relations, for development. There are a whole lot of things that impact on illicit drug use, on the people who use it, on the circumstances in which they use it, on the way that these drugs are made available, and so on. Context is important. So the regulation of illicit drugs is governed by international conventions. Whether or not illicit drugs are produced is often a byproduct of war and the need to finance war. How illicit drugs are dealt with is very much dependent on the political circumstances in the country. It's a problem where there are values conflict, to move down to the next item. So there are essentially two sets of values that are in conflict. One between people who think that drug use is a personal responsibility and that people make their own decisions about whether or not they use and should be treated accordingly, and others who think that we really have no control over whether or not we become addicted or dependent on illicit drugs, and so personal responsibility doesn't count. So that's one set of value conflicts which governs the response to illicit drugs. The other set of values conflict is between libertarians who think that people should be able to do as they please, whereas people who believe more in social control and regulation, and that if there's something that's bad for us as individuals or as a society, that governments have a role to regulate that. So again, there's another set of values conflict there. In terms of unknowns, there are a bunch of unknowns. There are a bunch of unintended consequences from different approaches to regulating drug use, that if the context changes, it has implications for what happens for drug use. What happens if we got an increase in permissiveness, for example? So that was one of the things we worried about in our trial, our proposal for a trial. And organised crime doesn't necessarily sit back and watch its business model disappear. If you look at what's happening in Mexico, for example, organised crime can really retaliate when governments want to regulate illicit drugs. And there are no perfect solutions to what we should do about the illicit drug problem, about what we should do about heroin use, if you just take that one slice of the problem. If you make it illegal, as it is now, that has a whole lot of consequences, but it keeps use reasonably low. If you regulate its use and don't make it illegal, the worry is that will have a lot of consequences for the number of people using, and getting the policy settings right to minimise the risks from a problem such as this versus the benefits is really what you're trying to do. So there's no perfect answer, but what you're trying to do is to get the best possible outcomes, the most benefits for the least problems. So if we look at the role of disciplines and stakeholders in addressing this problem, the interesting thing, and this is true for all complex problems, is that each has a critical but only partial understanding to contribute. So pharmacologists tell us something about how illicit drugs work. Epidemiologists can tell us how many people are using illicit drugs. Demographers can help us think about what sections of the population are using and what population trends are happening and how that might have implications. The law can tell us what the legal status of drugs is and what the regulations are. Police have views about how things are being controlled and what would work and what wouldn't. Drug users obviously have a view about what they think would be good and bad. people who've come off drugs often have a different view from drug users about what should be done. People who provide drug treatment services generally have a view, prison officers have a view, and so on and so forth. And so to reiterate the point that I'm trying to make is that each of these groups has a critical perspective on the problem, but each of them only has a partial perspective. So what I'm interested in is that it's no one's job to do a bunch of things when you're dealing with complex problems. So it's no one's job to deal with the problem as a system, to look at all the bits that hang together and what we need to do about those. It's no one's job to actually identify which disciplines and stakeholders are relevant, that have something to contribute, and to figure out how to get them to the table. When they are at the table, it's no one's job to bring those perspectives together. It's no one's job to identify which aspects of context are relevant. So is the political context relevant, the economic environment that we're in, the cultural environment that we're in? It's nobody's job to identify and manage value conflicts. It's nobody's job to worry about what we don't know, especially the unintended consequences. So each discipline has a way of thinking about particular unknowns, which are the business of that discipline. But when you're dealing with the complex problems, there are other unknowns that come into play, and it's nobody's business to worry about those. And again, it's nobody's business to help the policymakers and practitioners figure out what the best possible solution might be. And this is the territory that I guess I'm claiming. And so enter I2S, or Integration and Implementation Sciences. So I'm arguing that there's a set of knowledge and skills there that would form the basis of a discipline. And I'm suggesting that because the core elements of a discipline are integrating knowledge and helping to implement knowledge, that Integration and Implementation Sciences is an appropriate title. So what would it mean for this knowledge and skills to be recognised as a discipline? I'm just going to pause for a minute and have a look to see if anybody's sending in any comments to check that everybody's going all right. Karen asked everybody to mute, so I'm assuming that's all right. And I'm hoping that everybody's fine with how it's progressing. Does anybody have any questions at this stage before I continue on, or shall I soldier on? Okay, Christine says carry on, so let me do that. Thanks, Pips, who said the same. Okay, so for the remainder of this session, what I really want to do is to outline what I mean by integration and implementation sciences. So I've kind of set the scene for the kind of problems that I think this discipline is part of helping to address. And now let me say a bit about what this discipline does. So I'm going to talk a bit about the way that I think about this discipline, which is in terms of 3 domains and 5 questions. I'm going to give you an analogy with another discipline, the discipline of statistics, to give you some insights into how I think I2S would work. I'm going to talk about 2 key functions of the discipline, which are building a methods repository and providing an identity for people. I'm going to talk a bit more about then building the repository, and then I've got some questions that I hope will get us started in terms of the discussion. Every once in a while, it doesn't want to move on. There we go. So I'd argue that the discipline has 3 primary domains. The first of these is bringing together different knowledges from different disciplines and different stakeholders. The second of these is understanding and managing diverse unknowns, the unknowns that are not the business of disciplines, but that are the other unknowns that are involved in dealing with complex problems. And then it's about bringing together what we know and what we don't know to provide research support for policymakers and practitioners. So we think a lot about how do we take what we know and translate that into policy and practice change. But I'd argue there's a critical missing piece there, which is worrying about what we don't know, which is intended consequences and adverse surprises come from. So to recap that, it's about bringing together the evidence, what we don't know, and then bringing those together to help make change happen. I'd argue that the other part of the framework is to think about 5 key questions, and these are useful when you're planning research And they're also useful in terms of documenting research on complex problems from the perspective of this work that is nobody else's discipline, so nobody else's business. So the disciplines have got do what they do, they make their contributions to the problem, but then there's this integrative and implementation role. And I'd argue the 5 questions are, for what and for whom are we doing this? Why are we even tackling this problem? And who do we want to have benefit from us tackling this problem? The second question is what is needed, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. The third is how do we do this? How do we synthesize knowledge? How do we manage unknowns? How do we provide research support? The fourth is context. So what's the big picture context that we're operating in? What is it that gives us legitimacy to be working in this space? And then the fifth question is how do we know that what we've done has worked? And that's particularly, again, in relation to what we're trying to do in terms of integration and implementation sciences. I'm not going to go through each of these questions in detail, but let me just show you what I mean when I say question 2, what is needed. So this is about taking a systems view. It's about figuring out who the disciplines and stakeholders should be, scoping out what the breadth is of who's got something relevant to contribute, and then figuring out who you're actually going to involve, because often there are more people who have something to contribute than you have the resources to involve. It's about how do you frame the problem and what we're trying to do in this, taking a more comprehensive view that makes it understandable to the people that you're trying to involve and to the people who you're trying to get to make change happen. It's about taking values into account. And then it's about collaboration, which I think of very much as harnessing and managing differences. So what we're trying to do in a collaboration is we're trying to bring together people who have good differences, the things that we don't know that we need to know for this problem, that the range of disciplines, for example. But unfortunately, people don't come with just good differences. They also often come with inconvenient differences. So they might have a personality quirk or a way of working that's hard to deal with. And so we not only have to harness the good differences, we have to manage the bad differences. Let me just also show you what I mean by the question of how. So in terms of synthesizing disciplinary and stakeholder knowledge, we've got a bunch of methods that are based around using dialogue to do this. We've got methods that are based around modelling or building a product together or enacting a vision together. We've also got methods that I call common metrics based, so something like ecological footprint or disability adjusted life year, or what the economists use, which is money. They're great ways to bring a whole lot of knowledge together. You convert them into this other currency, if you like, so you convert everything to dollar values and then it becomes easier to integrate. In terms of understanding and managing unknowns, there are 6 ways actually of dealing with unknowns, and I'll just tantalise you with those. So what we're trained to do in our disciplines is to get rid of unknowns or to banish them. So the unknowns that are not the discipline's business, the ones that we put to one side, the unknowns that are the discipline's business, we try to get rid of. When we're trying to deal with complex problems, learning which unknowns we can't get rid of and that we have to accept and work with is really critically important. And then there are 3 other things about unknowns that as I said, I'll just tantalise you with. And then in terms of working with policy and practice change, there are strategies around communication, around advocacy, around engagement. Part of our job is also sometimes to bring fresh thinking to the table. So a lot of change occurs incrementally, but sometimes you need to rethink completely. So we have a job there. And we also have a job in not just being uncritical handmaidens of policymakers and practitioners, that we also have a job as researchers and academics of critiquing what they do. And then the last bit at the end is not only how we're going to do this, but who's going to do it on the team and when in the process, in the whole research process, they're going to do it. So what I'm trying to do is to give you a sense here of what is the business of the discipline of integration and implementation sciences and how things might be organised. And I hope I'm showing that there is a real knowledge skill set there, or a real knowledge set there and a real skill set there for dealing with these things. So let me move on and talk a little bit about how, for me, integration implementation sciences works very much like the discipline of statistics. The discipline of statistics gives us a really good analogy. So statisticians focus on quantitative reasoning, and they help teams to improve their quantitative reasoning skills and to make good inferences from the research that they've done. integration implementation scientists concentrate on helping teams deal with complexity and to not only improve understanding of complexity, but also to be able to inform those who are going to act. So we have a different business to what statisticians have, but we play a similar sort of role on a team, that we have a unique defined role on a team of people who are trying to move forward on a complex problem. The thing that statisticians have that we don't have is they have dedicated methods journals. So if a statistician working on an organised crime problem, for example, brings a method to the table and as part of working on that problem advances the method, they will publish that in a statistics methods journal. And then a statistician working on an educational problem or an environmental problem or a health problem can read about that method and say, oh yeah, that would actually help me, and pick it up and use it. For methods that deal with integration and implementation, we don't have those kinds of journals. And so what happens is that the methods that we use are widely fragmented. People often don't publish the methods that they develop at all, or if they do publish them, they're often published in an article about the problem in a journal about a different problem can't find it in order to pick it up and use it for what they. And I'm arguing that the methods that we use for integration and implementation, like statistics methods, are useful for a whole range of problems. The third similarity is what I would call effective inclusion in partnership. So the thing that statisticians have done really well is to say, look, guys, it's not enough that we just have this discipline of statistics. You have to use us, and you have to use us well. So those of you who've been around for a while will remember a time when statisticians used to be brought in at the end of a project to kind of help do the analysis. And they were terribly put out by this and saying that, well, you know, guys, you've made some really bad design flaws here and we can't fix those with analysis. You really have to bring us in at the beginning of a project. And statisticians have banded together to really make the discipline of statistics much more effectively used by teams than it was in the past. And so teams now wouldn't dream of doing a big project that needs statistics without having statisticians in there right at the beginning. And they wouldn't dream of using second-rate methods. They would have a statistician there who knew their stuff and who could help them bring the best methods to the table. Again, in terms of dealing with complex problems, we don't have an integrated community of integration and implementation scientists. We have a fragmented community. So we have lots of people who are interested in this set of problems but don't actually have a place, a home, so that we aren't a united voice that can say to people working on complex problems, well, guys, we have this skill set that you need to be using us, and you need to bring us into the project early on, and you need to have us there for the whole of the project, and here's what we can contribute. And so one of the things we need to learn from statistics is how to come together as a community to become more powerful. The fourth analogy is that statisticians provide two kinds of training. They provide training for specialist statisticians, but they also provide training for the rest of us. So most of us will know what our level of statistical literacy is, so that you might know that you don't know much about statistics at all and you need to bring a statistician in, or you might have some basic statistical skills that you can use for really simple analyses, but if it gets more complicated, you need to bring statistical help in. Our skills are often seen as soft and intuitive, and they're just about, and I'm using just in the pejorative way that they're often used, they're just about facilitation. And so I'm trying to argue that there is a much more concrete skill set here that we can identify and that we can educate people for. There are obviously also dispositions for doing this that not everybody has. So every discipline has a set of dispositions attached to it. So mathematicians tend to be a certain type of person, and social scientists tend to be a certain type of person, and integration and implementation scientists also tend to be a certain type of person. But there are, as well as those dispositions, there are a set of knowledge and skills that are really important, and that's what I'm really interested in developing and discussing today. So the key functions that I see of building a discipline of integration and implementation sciences is this issue of overcoming fragmentation, of giving us a common identity of researchers who help work on complex problems. And there are two groups that I think we will draw from in order to develop the discipline, so that there are already a lot of individual researchers out there working on complex problems who actually do a lot of these tasks intuitively or without getting a lot of recognition. But they'll be the systems thinkers who say, here's who needs to be at the table, here's what we need to be thinking about. They'll often be the people who can bring people together, who do know how to solve value conflicts, who know how to manage collaborations. The other place to get people who would help form this discipline are a number of communities of practice that already exist. So there are a bunch of communities of practice around systems thinking, about interdisciplinarity, around transdisciplinarity, around action research. The thing that interests me about these communities of practice is that they're all really, really small. So I spent some time going to conferences of these communities of practice, and what struck me was that the conferences always had less than 500 people, usually 100 to 200. Whereas if you were to go, back in a long time ago, I was a neuroscientist, and even back in the 1980s, a neuroscience conference had 9,000 people at it. Now, I'm not trying to say that a big conference is better than a small conference. The point I'm trying to make here is it says something about the community of practice, that disciplines have large communities of practice, and that gives them political clout and influence. We have small communities, small fragmented communities of practice, and what that means is that we don't have a lot of influence in trying to shape the way that our work is seen and recognised and rewarded. So one lot of fragmentation that I think we have to overcome is this fragmentation in identity. The other is to build the methods repository. So I've already said that the methods that we use, there are many. It's not that there are no methods. There are actually many methods out there, but they're widely fragmented, and it's really hard for people who are coming together to work on a complex problem to find what all the useful methods would be. And so those are the two things that I'm really interested in focusing on, how we do now and do better. So on this particular website, we're starting to build a methods repository or a resources repository. So it has methods. It also has journals that publish the kind of work that we do. It has conferences that we might be interested in attending, and it has professional associations and networks, these smaller communities of practice that I'm suggesting we might bring together. And the way that I see I2S is as a conduit that connects all these communities. So I'm not arguing that we should stop doing what we're doing and all become integration implementation scientists. I'm arguing that integration implementation sciences is the conduit that connects us, and that it can be one of our identities and a joint identity. So this is what the repository on this website looks like. This is some of the tools. So I've called them tools because they're both concepts and methods, what some of the tools look like, and there are 50 to 70 tools on that particular website that people might be interested to look at. The second thing that I've been doing is trying to build the community of practice and to build the methods repository through this blog, which is the I2 Insights blog. And this gives you, this slide gives you an indication of some of the people who've contributed posts to that blog, and very interested in having many of you contribute. So if you're interested, do drop me an email, and I'd love to work out an appropriate topic with you. And I'm hoping that you might join the blog and see what comes across it, and see if what comes across it might be useful for you. And I think Christine might say later that some of the people who contribute to the blog are ones that Intereach is targeting to give some of its future webinars, which I think is also terrific. So if you want to know more, as I said, there are these two websites that you can go to. There's a LinkedIn group, and there's also a Twitter that we can communicate via. So let me finish the formal remarks there. I'm intending this as a discussion starter rather than a kind of a very comprehensive overview. As Karen said in the introduction, there's a a book that's been written about this, plus a whole bunch of papers and blog posts if you're interested. And let me put up some questions that I hope will start a discussion. So the first is, are there anything that hasn't been particularly clear? And then I'm keen to hear how this resonates with you and what you do, how much you see your role as academic and how much you see it as administrative, and how you would advise move forward, not only for I2S, but also partnership that currently exists between I2S, Intereach and NORDIP, the research development professionals. So let me stop there.
Well, Gabrielle, I'll just jump in and say thank you so much for presenting, and this is really interesting. I have been one of, since the very beginning, I have been really so gratified to learn how much thinking you've done on this topic. I don't want to jump in first with all of my questions because I've talked enough on this webinar series, but I do have several, but just wanted to say thanks for being here, and I'm really excited that this resonates. This idea of having this webinar series resonates with you who have done all this work inventing the field already. So anyway, that's a thanks, and I'll be back with more questions when other people have gotten a chance to talk more.
Okay, thanks, Christine. And thanks for the opportunity to be here too.
Hi, this is Stephanie, and I think that my question might be a dumb one, but I'm a little curious about the distinction between I2S and, let's say, decision sciences, and whether or not there's overlap in those fields, or whether or not there's enough distinctions to call them two distinct fields.
I'm just getting a message to say my internet connection has become unstable, which is very inconvenient of it. So people are breaking up a little bit, and I'm sorry if I interrupted you, Stephanie, but whether or not decision science, how decision sciences fits is a really important question. So I guess there are a bunch of things that I2S intersects with, and decision sciences is one of them. So decision sciences does a piece of what I2S is setting out to do. So there's a whole massive modelling community, and modelling is a hugely important integrative skill, and so there are intersections with that too. So people, I guess what's been happening is that people have kind of identified chunks of what we need to do with complex problems and have started building communities of practice around them. What I'm trying to do is to take a kind of a larger perspective that, as I said, what I'm trying to do is to provide a conduit between all those different communities of practice that have started up. So decision sciences is obviously critically important for what I2S is trying to do, but it doesn't actually cover the whole terrain. And I'm not suggesting that we should reinvent decision sciences, but what I'm suggesting is what we need to do is to find partners. So or to partner with it. So if you were the integration implementation scientist on a team, and what the team needed was decision science expertise along with modelling expertise and someone to scope the problem out well and to do some systems thinking, you might not do the decision sciences piece because that might not be your skill set, but you would know who to go to bring in for that, and you might know the best kind of modeler to go to bring in for that, but you might be the best person to do the scoping and boundary setting around what the problem was going to deal with. So I'm seeing us as having a skill set. The skill set's actually huge, and the other thing that we have is a network of people that we can draw and bring in when we don't have advanced skills in something that's important for dealing with a complex problem. Does that answer your question? Thanks, Stephanie. I've got my comments open, and it's probably helpful for other people to do that too.
Hi, Gabrielle. This is Pips calling, and I wanted to echo Christine's thanks for being here. I've been such a big fan of yours for so long. It's great to see you on my screen and be having this conversation with you. I guess I have a question, but I also wanted to start out by saying that the I2S blog is probably the single most important thing I read every week, and I absolutely love it and have shown it to many, many people up here in Alaska. It really so nicely supports the things that the project that I'm involved with is doing, and it's really nice to have somebody else other than me saying, hey, these things are important and other people are thinking about them. So I really appreciate that blog and have learned and just kind of feel supported by almost everything that comes out. It's a phenomenal resource for me and for people up here. So I wanted to start by saying that.
Well, thank you. That's great.
I also, something that you said, I've always been thinking about the leader of a project as somebody who needs to acquire, these kind of integration skills that we're talking about. And something that you said made me think about it a little bit differently this time, is like having an expert in integration as part of your team rather than the team leader. And we don't have the luxury of doing that in our project right now. So as leadership, we're trying to get that skill set and promote that skill set. But I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about how you seeing that relationship between like an I2S expert and a PI, and if you see those two roles as the same. Are we trying to promote PIs with these skills, or are we trying to develop experts to play on the team as that person, and how does that work? Because it's slightly different from the model that we've been using out of necessity. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, the short answer is all of the above. And certainly, sorry, somebody's just asked me to go back a slide, so let me just do that if I can. So thanks, Pips. And certainly I have to say, when I listened to your webinar, I thought this person's doing I2S. So you can do it as a leader, and it's easy. And I think it's more straightforward to think about it as the leader. But there are some things that really only a leader can do. So setting the scope of the project is something that the leader of the project does. But a specialist can help them think about how to set that scope. So I would argue that the leader has to have some I2S skills, but doesn't need to have all of them. And they could have somebody on their team who is a specialist in this skill set, who then supports them and supports the team as a whole. So I guess I see it as a bit that there's a specialist set of skills and the leader may or may not be a specialist. There's a set of skills that leaders have to be able to do the leadership job well, even if they're not specialists. And there's a set of skills that the team also needs to have. So just as a team needs to have some statistical literacy, I'd argue that a team needs to have some literacy in integration and implementation, so that they understand what the integration and implementation scientists can offer the team. So it doesn't have to be very advanced, and they might actually be good at something. So they might be good at, they might be really good at running a dialogue, or they might be really good at doing particular sort of modelling. Or as Stephanie said earlier, they might know something about decision sciences, so that it's quite likely that people on the team will have some skills to bring to bear. So the integration implementation science person has a set of skills, can recognise those skills in other people, and can support the team in harnessing their own skills, in harnessing the team's skills, support the leader in bringing the team together, and then bring in outsiders for particular skill sets that might be needed on an ad hoc, one-off basis. Is that clear?
Yeah, and I think kind of with the research on shared leadership, I think that makes a lot of sense, that to expect that one person may have all of those skills and maybe, a disciplinary person and have all the integration skills and be a leader, is a lot to ask of somebody. So I do appreciate that, the model of shared leadership. And I think what we're talking about kind of supports that as well. And that's what we have kind of set up here. I find myself doing that, not being the PI, but being the person that brings those integration skills. So there's 2 or 3 of us that tend to be leading the project. But I think my skill set is better suited, not in the disciplinary sense, but from this integration piece that connects with the leadership. So I think we've kind of fallen into that with trial and error over time. But I can appreciate what you're saying. That makes a lot of sense to me. So thank you.
Great. Yeah, I guess one of the things that set me down this route is this notion that disciplinary experts in traditional disciplines just need to add this additional set of skills to their toolkit. So, they need to understand how to implement their research, they need to understand how to work with people, they need to understand this, they need to understand that. And I'm kind of thinking, well, for heaven's sake, what time does that lead you to develop the disciplinary base that you have? So I'd argue that what you want, and certainly the way that I operate, is what you want is you want to have people who are good at their natural, social science, whatever disciplines, bringing that skill set to the problem. But you don't want them trying to do all this stuff that they're A, not interested in, or B, not suited to do as well. That there's actually an additional skill set, and I'd argue an additional discipline. So Betsy's put up a question that says, can you talk a little about how to sell the addition of that skill set in a grant application? Gee, thanks, Betsy. That's that's an important question. I'd be interested in what other people would think about it too. So I can only really speak about the Australian and to some extent also the New Zealand context. There's growing interest in how to do interdisciplinary research, and so particularly around using the words interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary, there's growing interest in doing those, and there is sympathy from funders when a project says we're going to have somebody who can help us with this skill set. So it's challenging how to set it. I really can't talk about the US context, except let me just go sideways for a minute. One of the things that I had the opportunity to do last year was to go to the meeting of the Global Research Foundation. And this is a group that this brings together all the funders, 50 funders from 50 countries around the world. So France Cordova, the head of the National Science Foundation, was there, the head of the Australian Research Council, the head of the British Research Council's UK was there. So there are a whole lot of people who head up research funders at this meeting, and one of their priorities last year was how do we fund interdisciplinary research. So the thing that really struck me was that the funders are really keen to do this. They have really naive ideas about what's required, and we're not at the table to tell them what needs to be done. So if they were to say, we want to put more money into astronomy, the astronomy professional associations would be there saying, great. So here are the 10 top priorities that will advance society, blah, 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 blah. When they want to advance interdisciplinarity, they hunt around. And so what they did was really, really interesting. They got a consultancy group to write a report for them, and this group started, again, completely from scratch. And didn't talk to some of the leading interdisciplinarians like Julie Thompson-Klein. And then it just so happened that I'd been involved in something with our funder. They invited me to talk to the regional meeting. People heard me at the regional meeting and said we should get this woman to come and talk to the international meeting. But we're not there at the table. And so, this is not answering your question, Betsy. It's kind of answering a different question. That we're not there pushing our case, and that's because we're not a united group. And that's one of the things that I'm really keen to get us to do is to form a powerful lobby group, basically, so that when the funders said, okay, we want to put more money into this, we actually want to fund grants that do good integration across disciplines, we can say, well, you're actually not thinking about this particularly well. here's how it's done based on our experience. Here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to be funding. Here's what you need to be looking for in grant applications. So it's actually turning your question on its head a bit. Good on you, Pips.
Okay, so if maybe I can throw in a question now. This is it's similar to Betsy's question about the grant application, but more from an institutional perspective. So one thing that everything that you're saying is really just, you know, music to the ears, I'm sure, of anybody who's doing this work. And I'm curious what you would have to say about advancing the cultural acceptance and sort of the institutional acknowledgement of this as a necessary profession. So I have, for instance, in my own organization and own university, which is very, I'm at Duke, there is a vice provost for interdisciplinary studies here. But still, I think that the kind of ingrained institutional sense is that with some support, every person can add this type of thinking to their domain specialties. So I'm very, my services are very welcome at the table, but explaining to people that you need a decision-making seat at the table is another jump. And I think, you know, one end it comes from the way that people put together their calls for research, but I wonder if you could speak to where do you start? Is there a particular home department that people most often think of? Because I hear people saying, oh, well, we'll add a social scientist. They study people and we're people. And that's, I think that there's like a crude acknowledgement that we need the I2S skill set, but just how to break into the table from the university side. If you could just speak to your experience or advice on that, that'd be great.
So I'm going to do a bit what I did with Betsy's question and not answer your question directly. Any other discipline would not be looking for permission to be there. And one of the problems that we have is that we are because we're powerless, because we're fragmented, we find ourselves in a position of having to ask permission. The way that universities work is that disciplines are there as kind of power blocks, if you like, and the kind of power blocks do this dance around funding, defining a problem, all that. So if we're thinking about a problem, for example, they'll do a dance around the problem. And we're kind of there saying, please, can you include us? And they might grudgingly include us. So they might recognise that, you know, some people skills are needed, and they'll say, oh, social sciences do that, so let's just get one of those. Doesn't matter which one, it can be an historian or an economist or whatever, you know, not completely dissing the social sciences. So I guess, you know, one of the reasons why I'm kind of beating this let's band together drum is we have to get out of this position of being supplicants to being a group that says, you need to sit at the table, here's what we can offer, and here's what we need in return. We need to be in exactly that same position of power. So how do we get from here to there? Well, I guess I've been inspired by the Intereach webinars, because what they've done is brought together people like Pips and Betsy and others to really talk about how you're doing it. And what's interesting is that you're all tackling this, we're all tackling this in quite creative ways in our own way, right? And we're all a bit frustrated because it's not going as fast as we would like it to be, and we're not getting the acknowledgement that we want. But we're kind of finding ways through. And so what we're doing is we're doing what needs to be done. We're banding together, we're sharing lessons, and we're figuring out how to get that more effective voice at the table. And so I guess I'm kind of laying out a particular vision that we may or may not want to buy in. So, you know, I think the answer lies with you really about how you get to the table. I think you're already doing it very well, and I think that through convening Intereach and with Amanda and Karen convening the webinar series and bringing together people to share their experiences. I think that's exactly what we need to be doing now, and that's exactly what's moving us forward. And I'm hoping you'll make a pitch for what we're going to do at the SciTS conference as well. So, Betsy, it is, yes, Betsy says, does this make us a discipline or a profession? And NORDIP has the same issue. So, many years ago, Holly invited me to come and talk to NORDIP, and I said, nah, thanks very much, but I'm not coming because I do not want I2S to be seen as an administrative role. I think there's an academic role here to be played, and so I've been fairly, I've been deliberately casting this as an academic discipline, and that's got a lot to do with the fact that I think there is a real skill set there. That is a disciplinary skill set, and this is not meant to diss the administrative side of things at all, but I do think there is the ability there for this to be an academic discipline, and I guess this does go back to the question that Christine posed, is where do we sit? And I'm not so interested in that particular question, but a colleague of mine who's a deputy vice chancellor or deputy vice president in your language, said that where I2S sits is at the intersection of the social sciences and the design sciences, and that sounds about right to me. That's about how we operate, and so yeah, I'll just stop there.
I can't help but chime in one more time. This is Pips, because that word design is so awesome. I mean, I've used that a lot lately in thinking about how we're designing things, and this project that I've been leading for the last couple of years, Decision Theater North, is really about design thinking and how we use some elements of design thinking in thinking about science and thinking about how we're communicating things and how we're putting teams together. And it's that human element, and this conceptual model that I've been thinking about has data, it has people, and it has solutions. And the universities are just so well positioned to take advantage of this amazing amount of data and knowledge that we're creating. We have people that can connect outside the universities, and we're helping to make solutions. And I've been thinking a lot about design thinking and about how we implement some of the ways designers are doing things that have to work for people. You can't make decisions in a vacuum without people, and you can't help teams without people, and that requires thinking about solutions that work for humans and not just things that the data is saying strictly in a vacuum. And I love the idea of bringing design elements and design thinking to this conversation, and it's one that we talk about in our team a lot. So I just had to support that idea, and I'm not even sure where I go with the design thinking in the context of I2S, but I'd love to start thinking about that. It just makes total sense.
Great. So Jen Davison, you got excited. Do you want to say something a bit more about what you were thinking? Okay.
I have a question about journal publication, Gabrielle, and I'm guessing that you might say that because the way that I came at this when I was first thinking, okay, IES, before I realized that you had published Disciplining Interdisciplinarity, which already kind of contained a lot about the IES role, I was coming at it from the angle of, okay, well, this is necessary because of the complexity of the problems. So maybe you're going to say that these papers that our I2S discipline would publish would be disseminated across the literature, but are there specific methodological journals where you think the I2S field would publish, given that as an academic discipline our metrics would pretty much be what grants won and papers published, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I think that those parameters will count. And in a way, we need to be treated in the same way as statisticians are, so that what they get reward for is contributing to statistical methods. We would also get rewarded for contributing to the methods that help develop integration implementation, and they get rewarded for helping teams do their job, and we would get rewarded for doing that too, so we would be on their publications. I think there's a part of the problem is we don't have ways of writing up what we do, and one of the things that the I2S framework tries to do is to develop a way of writing up what we do. And what's been interesting for me is that I'm now working with a group in New Zealand who are doing exactly that, who are using it both to plan work but also to write up cases of work that they've done. And they're finding that a whole lot of stuff that has not been articulated, the framework helps them to articulate. And there's another group in Rhode Island that's now looking at doing the same thing. So that's really what I'm hoping, one of the things that I'm hoping the framework will do is it'll help us articulate a lot of what we do kind of tacitly, unrecognisedly, and to discover that there is actually a language for articulating it, and that there are methods. And I guess this comes very much from my experience of doing that work on heroin prescribing. It was all done intuitively by the seat of my pants. And when it was all over, it was like, so are there methods out there that we could have used? And I went looking for them and discovered that there was a whole bunch of stuff that we could have done and that would have helped us do what we were doing better. And so, and that's what made me then realise that there is actually a real knowledge set here that we can draw on. But the trouble is that we can do it intuitively. And a lot of people then think that's the only way to do it, that there's no there, but there is a there. So that's really what I'm trying to articulate. And so I'd argue that just as statisticians have journals in which they publish about methods, we would have that too. So there are already a whole bunch of modelling journals, for example. Interestingly, they tend to also be topic-based, so they tend to be about environmental modelling. And one of the things that fascinates me is that in public health, we don't do very much modelling at all. And we're just starting, and we're just relearning all the stuff that the environmental folks have been doing for decades. So, it's absolutely unnecessary. We could be picking up from where, we could be starting ahead of the game rather than going through all that tortuous process. So I would envisage having some journals that are quite specific, possibly on dialogue methods, on modelling methods, and then some that are more general, that are kind of research practice kind of methods. And there is already a journal of research practice, but it's not a very well regarded journal. It doesn't do a lot of this stuff. It does a lot of fairly fringy stuff. So I think part of what we need to do is to take over some of these and really make them our own journals. And if we use them and read them, then that'll send their impact factors up. That's, but it like everything else, it's going to take a while to get there. So Suzanne, g'day. You've asked about industry and developing industry partnerships. Yep. Well, let me start with the second part first. Yes, I absolutely agree. I don't think everybody has an aptitude for I2S. It's just like everybody doesn't have an aptitude for maths or physics or being a sociologist. I think there is a set of dispositional skills that makes you more prone to do this than to do something else. And I think that's part of what happens for young people. They find where they're comfortable, and that's where they then specialise. And I suspect that many of us have been people who found that a bit harder, that we kind of always looking over the fence to see what somebody else is doing, because that looks really interesting too. And so we're kind of a bit like magpies. We pick up a bit here and pick up a bit there. I think we are also a particular kind of people, and right now there's no good home for us. I see the three areas of application as being policy, practice, and industry. I don't talk about the industry piece much because I don't have very much experience in that myself, but I think absolutely that the skills that you need to collaborate with industry, while they're different from the skills that you need for collaborating with policy, I think they both of those, or all three of those, policy, practice and industry, need to be in the I2S specialists toolkit, that, helping people collaborate with end users of whatever sort is part of what we need to do. So Stephanie, you're trying to think about some of this. Do you want to throw in what you're thinking about and how that's going?
Yeah, so this afternoon, my hope is to take some of the thoughts from your presentation, some of the thoughts from Christine's recent presentation, and then some of the thoughts and things we've been talking about in the AAAS Community Engagement Fellowship Program, and see if I can't start to develop some toolbox prompts that look at potentially where the values of these three, I'm going to call them careers right now, 3 careers lie, if there's intersections, where the differences might be, who identifies as each, and whether or not, and I keep trying to think about it in terms of whether or not this is a continuum in terms of academic to administrative, or whether or not it fits on 2 axes, or how one might plot something like that.
So do you want to just tell people a bit more about what Toolbox is? Because not everybody will know about that.
So the Toolbox Dialogue Initiative is here at Michigan State University, and it originally came out of some work on an NSF IGERT program based in philosophy to use dialogue-based methods to explore the values and assumptions and ideas and positions that individuals in interdisciplinary collaborations, for the most part, hold. We've done some work in expanding the methods that Toolbox uses. So some of you on this call have been subjected to what we're calling Toolbox 2.0, which is where we not only run a dialogue session, but we now run a co-creation activity after the dialogue that helps groups achieve a tangible goal by structuring an activity that builds on the results of the dialogue. So this can include things like goal setting, brainstorming, grant writing, dot polling, all kinds of activities that help groups make tangible plans for moving forward. So we'll be running something like that, so this Toolbox 2.0 version, at Science of Team Science the morning of the first day. Yes. So there'll be split off into 2 separate Toolbox workshops, one that'll focus on the science of team science, so the scientific questions around team science, and another one that will focus on roles that support science of team science.
Great, thank you. Christine, to answer your question about starting a journal, in a way the blog is a first step in doing that. So I guess what I'm trying to do with the blog is build both the authorship and the readership for a journal, and we'll see whether it moves in that direction. I think the blog will continue to be valuable as well, but I think using it as the spin-off for a journal might be a good thing to do as well. So Brian, I haven't come across you before. Do you want to introduce yourself and say a bit about what your interest in all this is?
Can you all hear me?
Yep.
I'm guessing that I'm the Brian that was being referred to.
Yeah, there's only one Brian on the call as far as I can tell.
All right. Yeah, so I apologize for joining late. So I'm a program coordinator at Duke for the Superfund Research Center. And we do research translation and community engagement for the 5 basic science research projects that are done in our center. As you can imagine, that involves some interdisciplinary thinking and coordinating scientists and thinking across disciplines. I definitely have a strong belief that working in silos and not thinking across disciplines is a handicap for moving science forward, and have seen that in various stages of my career in universities, but also in at a consulting company that I worked at before coming to Duke. So I'm interested in learning more about what you all are doing, and seeing if there are ways to apply techniques and methods to our work at the Superfund Center, but then also learning more about integration and implementation science in general for my own career and progressing within my work.
Great, thank you. Larry, I haven't come across you either. Do you want to just introduce yourself?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was just listening. I'm Larry Creech. I'm from Georgetown, and I'm in the interdisciplinary, or actually it's a liberal studies program at Georgetown. I'm finishing a doctoral thesis. And I've listened to this conversation. I came in a little bit late, and I've listened to conversations from other groups. And it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I certainly don't mean to insinuate I have a solution that will solve everything, because this is a very complex issue. But the question I have is, it sounds like almost like we're looking at interdisciplinarians as being the people that would come into a diverse group of disciplinary people who are working on a program and pull it together and kind of manage it. Well, first, interdisciplinarians are not synonymous with project managers. I say that I managed a law department for the last 8 years for the government, and as a program manager, and I'm not a lawyer. My general counsel kept asking why I didn't go to law school. She couldn't understand that not everyone wants to be a lawyer. But the point is that it takes a very unique skill set to manage a program that doesn't necessarily require any disciplinary knowledge. It helps if you have it, but to assume that an interdisciplinarian would have any of those skill sets, even though they may have, and I won't go into my long soapbox on it, but interdisciplinary is not always the correct term either. But an interdisciplinarian would bring some skill sets possibly from a couple of disciplines, but that's not going to solve your problem of managing it. So am I missing the point there, or is that kind of the gist that you were looking for?
Thank you. That's a great contribution. So you did miss a bit of at the beginning of what integration implementation science, the gap that it's trying to fill, but you're absolutely right. Project management is one of the areas that has been developing an important set of skills. So it's a bit like the question that I think it was Jen that asked earlier about, how does this differ from decision sciences? So and the answer I gave there was that there are communities that have grown up to do pieces of what needs to be done when we're dealing with complex problems, and the decision sciences are one lot, project management's another lot. And the project management community, unlike many of these other communities, is not small. It's actually a huge community, as you well know. And I would argue that an integration implementation scientist does need to have good project management skill, or needs to bring good project management skills into a project. So it might be the project leader who has that. You might bring in a project manager. That might be the I2S specialist who has that. But you're absolutely right. Project management skills are, particularly when you're dealing with large complex problems, projects are an important part. And I suspect you might agree with me that part of the frustration is that project management's a set of skills that everybody thinks that they can do, and often does really badly, and doesn't know what skills there are, what tools there are that they can actually use. And that's kind of a microcosm of what's happening in integration and implementation sciences more generally. You can do it without knowing anything. You can do it by the seat of your pants. You just might not do it very well. And there's a bunch of knowledge and skills out there that can help you do all of this stuff better. Did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think we're thinking along the same lines. I just going back on a lot of years of experience, it's not intuitive in management. Like I said, the people who are working in the disciplines, and even the interdisciplinarians, have very specific knowledge and skills, and they bring the solution to whatever the problem is that's brought the team together.
Yep.
But more often than not, and I'm not saying it would never be the case, but more often than not, they are using an intuitive approach to what makes sense and how you would manage it. And I can tell you from years of experience, it's not intuitive at all.
No, that's
Like,
right.
sometimes just the opposite.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe, and again, I apologize for coming in late, but I've listened to some similar discussions like this, and it seems like everyone is working towards a common solution of how to deal with a very real issue of working across disciplines, whether it be trans or interdisciplinary or multi or whatever, and how to do that effectively and efficiently with a dwindling budget, as I'm sure everyone else is having the same issue, and do it correctly. And
Yep.
I would just add one suggestion, possibly, that when you're putting together these teams, this is something in government they always wanted to bypass until recent years. They never wanted to include in funding for the management of the project. It was just assumed that we have these real smart people doing things, and we'll just have them do double duty and pick up and do it, and you're setting them up for failure. And what I've done for the past decade or decade and a half is, you can either pay me now, give me the funding to do the project right, and meet and I'll call them stakeholders, which would be the individual disciplines, or you can pay me later and I'll come back and clean up the mess you made, because it's
right.
going to fail.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. MO 69964, do you want to identify yourself and join the conversation?
Hi, my name is Jan. I don't know why my computer's showing up with that ID number, but I really do have a name. I'm a research scientist in the Center for Individualized Medicine at Mayo Clinic, and a lot of the things that I do are very interdisciplinary, and so that's part of why I wanted to call into this session today, and why I went to my first Science of Team Science meeting last year, was just to kind of start to get an understanding of what are other people doing and how can I do what I'm doing better. But also, as we were just discussing with funding, I have a lot of colleagues who say, yes, what you do is really important, but then trying to get the funding to keep me on board to do that has been very challenging. And so I think it's great to see that there's others, like-minded people, that are trying to come together to say, how can we show others that what we do is really important?
Great, thank you. Christine, do you want to, I see we're getting close to the end of our time. Do you want to chime in and talk a bit about the session at the Science of Team Science conference this year?
Sure. That was a perfect segue from Jan there, mentioning the last one. So the Science of Team Science workshop this year is in June. June 12th through 14th in Clearwater Beach, Florida. And if anyone the registration is still open. If people are able to join us, that'd be fantastic. So this year we're reprising our last year's workshop where Gabriele and Holly Krasinski and myself first said, let's gather this group of people who have been interested in the topic of how to build a career around this intersection of roles. And so we got basically this group off the ground at that. Amanda and Karen agreed to take the ball and run with a webinar series, and they've just done a fantastic job. Now here we all are, and we thought, let's take the next step, and could have been a number of different directions, but we decided to leverage some of what Gabriele has done on the I2S blog, specifically in translational ecology, and I'm sure other fields, but there were a series of posts, if anybody wants to go to the I2S blog and check out those, on identifying the knowledge, skills, and dispositional attributes that people, for us, we're going to be self-identifying those locus of points that define ourselves. And so we're not, we could have gone in a couple directions with our next meeting, and one of them could have been a splitting direction where we try to look for our distinctions, and we decided instead to look for our commonalities, because then that's going to help us find just what Jan said, what's going to help all of us. What are these types of resources or best practices or conversations that we find collectively useful? So I'll just tell you that I'll read it to you for a second, so it's going to sound more wrote. But the workshop addresses a new but growing science-generated community of practice and research called Intereach. And Intereach stands for Interdisciplinary Integration Research Careers Hub. It's supposed to span all the different types of roles, so we don't favor one. The Intereach community has evolved around a broadly shared need for new types of roles to be defined, recognized, institutionally supported, and trained in order to optimize the success of interdisciplinary scientific endeavors. One could make the case that they don't have to be hard science endeavors, so we're welcoming all folks to this. We will cover the new forms of expertise needed to address complex problems and effectively engage diverse knowledge bases, and work at the interfaces between disciplines to help facilitate, optimize, and translate research outcomes. So we're going to get together and get in some small teams, not divided by types of roles, just small teams of groups of us, and brainstorm what do we think the areas of knowledge we have are that are important for our roles. Just saying what those are. What are the skills that we have that are critical to us being successful in our roles? And then what are the dispositional attributes, back to the earlier part of this conversation. And then we're going to share them all with each other, see what we have, and put together something ranging from a white paper, definitely a blog post of some sort on the I2S insights, and just sort of see the purpose of it is to generate this thing that I just mentioned, but the whole purpose of doing that is in service of us as a group. So really want to be collective as far as how is this advancing all of us and our abilities to do our jobs and to create the space for them to be institutionally acknowledged beyond just our individual roles. So helps us all. Any questions, you can send them out to the Intereach listserv because then it'll be a little bit more traffic on there. I think, again, if you have anything about either the workshop or, and you know what, that'll be one thing for me. I'll send out an invitation and encouragement to consider registering for that workshop. I know not everybody can be there, so we'll find a way to download what happens there later. But also in between, if you have other things that might be of interest to the group, don't be shy about sending something to intereach@duke.edu. That's all I got.
Great. Thank you. Does anybody want to have the last comment or question?
I actually want to have a comment. I'd like to thank Gabrielle for a wonderful presentation, and just to let people know that on May 30th from 1 to 2:30, we're going to have another webinar. Holly Falk-Krasinski is going to present at that point in time, and you're going to be getting more information about that through the listserv. And I also want to thank Matt for providing us with a platform for our webinar.
Great, thanks, Karen. Well, that sounds like a good place to wrap it up. Karen, I'll let you. I was going to let you do that, and I'll unless somebody wants to. We've got 7 minutes. If somebody wants to have a last comment or question, otherwise I'll let you wrap it up, Karen.